Okay, hope I'm here. Good evening. It's just Friday night, actually, 8:01 p.m. And this is for B76, and it's the taped lecture for essentially for Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and perhaps an attempt to summarize what's been going on as we go through these four movies, all of which I'm identifying as operating within some kind of parameters of the Hollywood romance, even though they have demonstrably, very different plots at certain times. I mean, keep trying to point out the work that the movie is doing within the narrative of the genre. And one of the things that's required, in a way, if the Hollywood romance is going to be hired to tell the story, there's certain things it needs to be able to do. Otherwise, it gets fired. And it needs to set up a chance encounter that both seems utterly random, and at the same time incredibly brings forward the hyper-complementarity of the romantic couple, which it typically does by showing an initial antagonism that becomes the basis for a profound appreciation. So it can happen very quickly, like Benjamin bringing Elaine to the strip club and being as mean as possible, saying, of the stripper, that you're missing a great effect. Can you do that? Which is nearly as bad as Joel's comment when Clementine says, what's going through your wormy little brain is did I sleep with someone? And I'm using euphemisms just because this is taped. I don't want my relatives just shock my aunt. But anyway, so she says, you're just wondering if I slept with someone. And he says, no, Clementine, I'm not wondering that at all. I know you did. So that's pretty bad. But the killer is when he says, isn't that how you get people to like you? And she storms out. And that's the end of the relationship that before they get into the issue of Lacuna. And she's the one who impulsively, as she herself puts it, heads to Lacuna to get rid of her memory of him. The point I'll make immediately is that when you're rushing off to get rid of the memory of someone, and that was a mean comment by any standard, but mean comments aren't mean unless they also hit a vulnerable point, which is not to say that Clementine sleeps around, because I don't think she does, and I certainly believe her when she says, I don't do that. But she has run into this a lot, that men seem to think that part of her personality is to really put herself out there. And when a woman acts like Clementine, saying, why don't you sit over here, and why don't you, it's read as sexual availability. It doesn't mean that's what she's trying to do. In fact, I don't think it is at all. She deals with her insecurities by being an extrovert. Joel deals with his insecurities by being an introvert. And both are acts to a certain extent that offer them a buffering against their insecurities, which are constantly threatening to eat them alive. So Clementine comes off as sexually available just because she doesn't put up the usual buffers that we expect from the feminine performance. Her feminine performance is a refusal of the feminine performance. She won't play coy. She doesn't try and dress in a kind of Cosmopolitan magazine sexy. She comes off. She certainly has a kind of sexuality, a sexiness that because it's kind of unforced and it's unpackaged. So she's not going to come out of the bedroom in the lingerie to kind of commemorate the beginning of their relationship, or put on lipstick and fuss with the makeup, and we're concerned how she looks to Joel. And ironically, it's Clementine's unforced availability that makes her so sexually attractive, certainly to Joel, and probably to Patrick in his creepy way, and to most men. They're drawn to her apparent availability, and they fail to recognize that her apparent availability is her buffer. She makes herself very available, or so that she can try and cope with insecurities about rejection. It's a bit paradoxical, but not as crazy as it sounds. I mean, if you make yourself extremely available and then you get rejected, you can kind of chalk it up to the fact that you're just so available that that's going to happen and it doesn't matter. And then the opposite, which is what we're more familiar with, um, is that you're very cautious about making yourself available so that the rejection doesn't happen. What Clementine does is she front loads whether the rejection is going to happen or not. So she's completely in your face, and you really have to make a decision 2 minutes after meeting her whether you're going to say, I really just wanted to read a book, if you don't mind, just end it. Or, I want to call it aggressive flirtation and make that different than being provocative. She's not trying to seduce Joel physically. She is trying to find out fast whether he can take her or not. That's partly Clementine's MO. That's why she brings all her dates to a frozen river with a crack in it, a giant crack in the Charles River, and they lay down. And if the date won't go out on the river, and Joel nearly doesn't, well, that's the end of the date. And if they do go out on the crack, then they've passed the first test. And what part of what Clementine's saying, and I'm not sure how aware she is of this, but I think she must be somewhat aware of this, is dating me is like going out on a beautiful moonlit frozen pond that might break, and you might plunge in, and the water's going to be freezing. And if you don't want to countenance that possibility, then I don't want you to be with me, because first of all, I'll be too nervous, because I'm a frozen pond that breaks sometimes. People who are with me fall in. They don't necessarily die, but they fall into freezing water, and it puts an end to everything. You got to go home and get changed and get warm and all, and so on. And she's saying, this is me. And then she's saying that the whole movie, this is me, this is me. And that's, in a way, that's one of her strengths. She simply doesn't hide anything. Joel hides everything, as she points out. But this will become a weird way that they balance each other. When somebody who hides everything meets somebody who hides nothing, there's potentially a middle ground, where the one who hides everything will begin to learn the importance of showing something. And the one who hides nothing will begin to realize the importance of not just having everything out all the time to everyone. I mean, I think that's why Joel and other men get the impression that Clementine must sleep with everybody, because she makes it clear the minute she meets you that sleeping with you might be a possibility. Who knows? But it's not because she's saying let's do it. It's just that she would like to find out sooner rather than later if you can be with her. What she doesn't want, and one gets the feeling we don't know for sure, but she doesn't want someone who says, I can deal with, you're sexy, I like you, and I can deal with the other stuff I don't like about you because I'm sure you can change. And we've all heard this before. Don't expect someone to change. It's not even fair. And it's really self-righteous to be like, you'll be better off when you're more like the person that I want you to be. You can't really cherry pick other people. It's really dangerous in a way to I like these 6 things about you, and I don't like the other 4. And so I'm going to jump in because 6 isn't bad, and we'll fix the other 4. Either you'll drop them or you'll change them. And one thing that the point Eternal Sunshine is making all the time, and this goes back to the lacuna method. You cannot alter any memory without altering all memories. It's a seamless fabric, and this is a cinematic metaphor too. That when you're watching a movie and you're 7 minutes into the movie, you're no longer watching the 6 minutes that leads up to the 7th minute, but your understanding of the 7th minute is informed by the 6th minute. So in a way, you're watching the entire movie so far all the time. So the movie itself, even in your viewing history, has a past. And Eternal Sunshine brilliantly takes liberties with that. Because what's the past of this movie? It's not like it happened one night. I mean, you're obviously going to remember each time they put up that blanket for the walls of Jericho. You're going to remember every other time they put up that blanket. And partly, and it'll feel like you're watching a development, like their relationship is developing on each side of the walls of Jericho, which is true. But it's also true, and until this movie, we haven't seen it foregrounded, that love is repetition. so that every new time they put up the wall of Jericho, it is a new time, but they're still who they are. And if there is any development, it's usually a more advanced self-awareness. The DNA of their self-construction doesn't shift. I mean, so they don't fundamentally change. And that's one of the things that's unique about romantic love, is that it's repetition with difference. But it is repetition. And in this case, of course, the repetition is astonishing because they both got each other erased. And somehow they're on this train to Montauk. Which this is a Hollywood romance about Hollywood romances, because it opens the way every Hollywood romance should. Like two people who don't know each other happen to be at a train station. We saw that. It's good. It's called It Happened One Night. Okay, it's a different train. It's heading to Montauk, and that was a bus. But buses, trains, cars, the Lotus in Pretty Woman, they meet in a car. Elaine and Benjamin, the beginning of their relationship revolves around a car, speeding to the strip club, but then afterwards happily eating with the car parked. And the car plays a big role. He keeps driving back and forth from Santa Barbara back to LA, and then to San Francisco and so on. Because she goes to college, Berkeley. I didn't know my geography when I first saw the movie, The Graduate, and I wasn't from California. I grew up in New England, so when I met, I met my wife, who's from California, and we were long distance dating, and I kept thinking she could drive from San Francisco to LA in 10 minutes, because that's how long it took Benjamin. I mean, my entire life outside of my known world was given to me by movies. And she said, hey, God, get it through your head. California is huge. That's a 6.5 hour drive. I said, hey, how can it be? It can't be. It wasn't that long a drive in The Graduate. So you can see which what I think is more real, cinema. But that became, when I knew that, then I was kind of fascinated with the way that The Graduate just compresses time. I mean, I knew films could do that. I just didn't know that this was an instance of that. I'm seriously not sure there's enough hours in the night for all the driving that he's doing. But not everyone's from California, so who knows? I mean, and then probably even a Californian just lets it slide. But anyway, so back to Eternal Sunshine. We're back to repetition, but we don't know. See, we think we're watching the same opening scene as It Happened One Night. Two people who don't know each other. And, it's not so surprising that they start to notice each other. They're the only people on the platform. It's really cold. Montauk's a beach. Who goes to the beach in the winter? Why does he go to the beach? I mean, we're not going to know until nearly the end of the movie, that the last thing she says to him before the final memory gets erased is "Meet me in Montauk." But how does that work? Because the reason he seems to vaguely remember this enough to get up and just go to Montauk is that that's not something that the actual Clementine ever said to him. She didn't say that when they were at the beach house in the scenes where they actually first meet. And most of the movie, we see the Clementine that Joel remembers, although it's not exactly the Clementine he remembers, because she seems to have agency. But that's how memories work. Memories of loved ones have agency. They make us think differently and see differently and feel differently, even when they're not there. I mean, any loved ones you have who have passed on, I'm sure are not gone for you. And when people say things like, your father would have been so proud if, I wish my aunt could have been here, this would have been so exciting for her. Well, and that's why it's not, whether you're religious or not, it's not unfair to say, oh, but she is here. At the very least, she's here because you're thinking about this here through your imagination of what it would be like for her if she were here with you. You know, it's very loopy, but it's our identities are based on memory traces of how we imagine others would perceive us in the place where we are. And unfortunately, this cuts back the other way, so that if we, as a child, if we live through a particularly abusive relationship with someone, it can operate the other way, where every time we're about to succeed at something, this voice saying you're worthless and you'll never amount to anything can intrude, and we can self-sabotage to protect our memory, really our fantasy, our fantasized memory, that the abusive person wasn't, we'd like to think, as abusive as in fact they were. This is, in one way, this is the point of therapy, because the therapist can essentially intervene with your memory and say, you know, I'm trying to follow this, and you keep saying, but he loved me, and then you keep reciting these incredibly unloving things. Why do you keep interpreting that as his loving you? And the real answer is that when you're a child, it's terrifying to think that someone who's taking care of you doesn't love you, especially when they say they do, and you'd much rather believe them. And also, as a child, when you're dependent on a parent or a caretaker, whom, depending on the degree of actual abuse versus the inevitable failings of a parent-child relationship, no matter how loving. But where there's actually abuse, it is much less alarming for the child to think that the abuse came about because the child did something wrong. So if an abuser knocks a kid down because they spilled their milk, who among us from the outside wouldn't say that what you just did was abusive? And at a minimum, you have a lot of apologizing, if not, you know, if there shouldn't be some kind of social service intervention. But that's not what the kid's going to hear. What the kid's going to hear is, why do you keep spilling your milk? Can't you see it drives me crazy? Why do you spill your milk when you know it drives me crazy? Well, he didn't spill his milk because he knows you're crazy. In fact, he probably tries hard not to spill his milk. But spilled milk, by definition, is something you didn't mean to do. That's why we call it an accident. It's different than pouring your milk on the kitchen floor and telling your parent to clean it up. I mean, that would be obnoxious, and still shouldn't be hit. But it might be a little bit more like, Mom, you clean that up. You just poured it on the floor. I'm not your slave. I mean, you'd have a different interaction. But in the abusive case, where a kid gets hit for spilling the milk, it is much less terrifying to be like, okay, when I spill the milk, my parent can't, I get hit by the parent, because that's the natural order. That's what you just, when you spill milk, you deserve to be hit. So I have to really, really, really try not to spill milk. And then of course the list proliferates, and we know this in domestic abuse with a married couple too, that the abuser keeps adding to the list. I told you to keep the curtain shut. I told you to dust the table. I told you the fork was on the left. And every time it's presented as, this is such a simple list. What is wrong with you? I'm not a violent, abusive person. You just can't stick to the list. There's a great movie called Sleeping with the Enemy, with Julia Roberts, and if I can find the clips, I'll show you this really amazing depiction of how abusers work. But anyway, okay, so I got a little off on the segue here, but everything. So our memories are the fabric of our identities. And there are rips and tears in our memories, and we try to knit over them. And just because we remember something doesn't mean that's the way it happened. Frequently, for the most part, it rarely is, because the memory has to be selective in order for you to remember something. You can't remember everything. I mean, remembering is where you take different parts of something and you remember it. You do a Frankensteinian stitch job, and you wind up with your Frankenstein. Memories are a little like Frankenstein. They don't have life on their own. You went around and found body parts and stitched them all together, and then the jolt of electricity that brought the Frankenstein to life is the memory. And so then, but they're not, and those memories can be terrifying. But for what it's worth, Frankenstein, or rather, what would have Victor's monster, Victor Frankenstein, because the monster is never given a name by anyone, is just he's a child, he's a frightened child who keeps trying to find his father. All of the deaths that occur are, and even when he kills his father's fiance, that's simply the desperate, violent act of a neglected toddler. And the father just doesn't get it. He gives life to his son. And I think part of Mary Shelley's point is that thank goodness men can't have children on their own, because at least in Mary Shelley's experience, they're emotionally absent, terrible, negligent, and and children would all go insane. Those are the kind of fathers that she knew, including her own father. That's why it's a feminist masterpiece as well as a masterpiece of science fiction and Gothic and on and on. But and it's not just feminist, it's not just Gothic. The feminist dimension is that Victor gives birth to a son and then ignores it. And that's so sad. And it's easy to, particularly when you see the movies, say Boris Karloff, it's really hard to remember that this gigantic monster with the bolts in its head and this scars everywhere has just been born. It doesn't know any better, and it just wants to be loved like any child. But it's also like 8 feet tall and can kill without half realizing. So that's my initial look, attempting to put Eternal Sunshine in relation to the other movies we've seen so far. We are going to watch the opening of two people who've never met meet, and as far as we know, when we go into the theater, they've never met. So as we watch them flirt, and if you want to call it that, because it's kind of an edgy flirting, and they get drawn to each other, we think we're watching a traditional romance, and then it starts to go back, and we ultimately, this is certainly a movie that invites you to watch it again, so that we can watch that opening scene where they first meet. I'm hoping to do that tonight. I'll keep my eye on the time, where we'll see that, unlike Clark Gable and Claudette Colbert, unlike Peter and Ellie in the bus, there is something edgy about their flirting. There's something angry. There's all of their emotions are there, and Joel's not at his best, and neither one of them seems to be capable of putting on a show for the other, which is why I think ultimately they are and will be always drawn to one another. They're incapable of role playing in very, very different ways. Clementine's incapable of stepping back and waiting to see what will happen. She just attacks the situation so that it'll either break or become more significant. As she says, I hate nice. When he says, oh, that's nice, he goes, I hate nice. What are you talking about, nice? And that will be a kind of running theme. And it is that's just Joel's deflection. Saying something's nice doesn't give you any information. Just like the scene where Julia Roberts keeps saying, I'm fine. And he says, can we have another word? And she says, yeah, asshole. It's like, I think I prefer fine. So we have these empty words, fine, nice, don't worry about it. And really it locks people out, which is not necessarily bad. I mean, if it's someone you hardly know and you just want to move on to something else, then saying don't worry about it is fine. But when you say don't worry about it to your romantic partner, there's a problem there in a way. They just said they were worried about it. So if you just say don't worry about it, which really means I don't want to deal with you worrying about it, you've kind of locked them into a loop where they've now been told to stop worrying about it. And if you tell them that you haven't been able to stop worrying about it, then you're not doing what they asked, which was to stop. But also what they're really saying is I don't really want to unpack what you're worried about, because it goes to places in me that I don't like to visit. And that's always going to be the make or break points and what's unique to romantic relationships. You care enough about the other person to go to places that you normally are very strict with yourself. They're off bounds. You don't go there. Many times we've forgotten they're there. And then something about the lover will take us past a boarded off area in our own memory scheme, and we're kind of like, I won't go there. And what the other partner feels when they've inadvertently led you past something you don't want to see is, where did you go? Like, we were talking, we were holding hands, we were walking along, and I said something, and you just gone. I mean, sometimes lovers will actually be holding hands with someone and they'll stop holding hands with them. They'll disconnect as though the other person were a live wire. And it's not because the other person said something mean, although that would obviously be a reason to drop somebody's hand. I mean, holding hands itself is a really interesting romantic act. It's and we should think about that, actually. How much hand holding is there in these movies we've seen? Because we've been obsessing with the kiss, but the kiss is a much higher level of intimacy than holding hands. I mean, you can hold hands with a child. You can hold hands at the movies. Holding hands doesn't necessarily mean you're going to kiss. It's very preliminary, but it's also really important. Holding hands is kind of a remarkable thing in a way. I mean, first of all, you have to synchronize a little bit with your walk, like, so that you're not, pulling on the other person. So there's a sense of, you need some attunement when you hold your lover's hand. I don't want to give you lessons on how, or get you too self-conscious. Next time you hold your lover's hand, you're gonna be like, oh my God, let's think about this. I mean, you're not supposed to have to think about it. And there's even an implication that lovers who are in sync can hold hands effortlessly. And when there's awkwardness in one side or both, holding hands is hard. It's like, suddenly it's like a tactic or something. Or even if you're with a lover and you've had a bit of a fight, holding hands can be really self-conscious. I mean, it was one of the weird things about Melania and Trump was that the press was fascinated with Melania, the times, which happened more than once, where Trump, because the cameras were there, I think, mostly, reaches for her hand so that they can be the image of the strong, powerful, wealthy man with this supermodel. And there were a few times she wasn't having it. She either pulled the hand back before he could grab it, or she literally pulled her hand out and kind of smacked the back of his hand. And because you have CNN and everything else with telephoto, God help us if we have to be in that kind of. But maybe like during the whole Stormy Daniels mess, I think there were a couple times she wasn't holding his hand. I can't say I blame her. I think she's made her own deal with that relationship somehow. I don't think she's a victim, because she has ways to get out. There's a degree to which the relationship suits her, so I don't judge that. But she has limits clearly within. It's almost a little like she's saying to him, I'm not at your beck and call. You're walking toward the press and you want to hold my hand so that you look like the big guy with the beautiful wife. And most of the time I'm fine with that, but you were such a jerk last night, or I found out something about you that you lied about repeatedly, and I'll be damned if I'm going to hold your hand right now, or maybe ever. I mean, that's where the breakup can start, right? I mean, when do breakups start? And sometimes it's obvious. They happen, you find out that someone's with someone else and they lied about it, and so the relationship's over. But there's a much slower way for relationships to die. It's a great Sinead O'Connor song where something she talks about, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, I knew the romance was over because you used to take my hand when the plane took off. It's a brilliant detail that he's off somewhere. He used to always hold her hand when the airplanes took off, because she must have been nervous about takeoffs. And he didn't. And it's those little things you can notice, like, oh, she used to bring me some tea, or ask if I wanted some tea, and that's not happening anymore. The tiny little things. And you don't want to overreact and say, oh, he didn't open the door for me, it's over. But there can be an accumulation of kind of a benign neglect that can start to set in, on one or both partners. Okay, so that's that. Now, so Eternal Sunshine is a postmodern romance. So I want to say a few things about postmodernism now. And the main way that it's a postmodern is that it does this flip. Up until now, the whole point of falling in love in the Hollywood romance is to show that the couple has moved on from an initial clash, an initial antagonism, and then the act of falling in love has found a resolution of that initial antagonism, and that proves they're in love, and now they can move forward. What Eternal Sunshine winds up doing, and it's unique, it's an astonishing movie in this way, is it shows you a couple that realizes that their fundamental incompatibility is at the base of their love for one another, and that they can't get rid of that incompatibility without getting rid of the love. And to be honest, that makes, to me, this makes Eternal Sunshine is the most realistic depiction of romance that Hollywood's ever done, and maybe the only one. Although we saw it a bit at the end of The Graduate, like that long take that I was talking about, where they start to get nervous and self-conscious, isn't necessarily bad. But in 1968, we hadn't seen other romances, so it's kind of like, what's going on? Aren't you supposed to cut so we can imagine their future as effortless and complementary? And Nichols won't do it. And obviously, Gondry, who did the screenplay, he won't do it either, but he goes another step forward and says, and the unresolvable antagonism is at the heart of every great romance. And then what makes a romance great is that you can't get rid of the antagonism, and you want to relate to the other person anyway. I mean, that's that incredible ending where he says, wait, because she's just heard the tape where he just said all this, not just the terrible things he said to her, but some of the terrible things he said to the Lacuna guy when they were doing the debriefing or whatever. And they sound kind of unforgivable. And so she leaves. I mean, they had the same beautiful date, it seems, that they'd already had before we got to the point that these tapes are now depicting. And so for her, in a way, it's a no-brainer. Like, so I've seen where this relationship ends. That's terrible. Like, I'm confused, but I'm out of here. Why would I get on a train headed for Heartbreak Hill? What's the point? I mean, you don't get on trains in romances where you ask the conductor, where are we headed? And they say, well, we're not headed anywhere. This is going to be a train wreck. Who gets on that train? I mean, who doesn't say, oh, thanks, I'll wait for the next one? That joke that people say that when you're dating is people should come with warning labels. This guy's a lot of fun and he's funny, but some of the side effects are he's not going to call you back or be reliable, and the equivalent for but people don't come with warning labels because love requires unresolvable antagonism. Not if there's too much of it, you can't get to love. If there's none of it, you can't get to love. Look at Patrick. Patrick's pathetic, obviously. And he's a stalker and an abuser, really, even though she doesn't know. He has access to what she wants to hear and where she wants to go and how he should act, right down to the virtual dialogue. And she can't stand him. She doesn't know why. I mean, he is so confusing to her, but he's got no skin in the game. He's not, he's just manipulating her because he's got a superficial crush and she's sexy and he wants to sleep with her, and that's it. There's no, and he's not even, who is Patrick? He's literally not there because he's impersonating the emotional structure of Joel. So she's never met Patrick. We've never met Patrick. I don't know if Patrick's ever met Patrick. He's a chameleon, and that's why she feels vaguely repulsed, even when he brings her to the Charles River, and they lie down in the exact same place, and he says the exact same dialogue. This is where I could die and be happy. There's nowhere else I want to be. And she sits up and says, I want to go home. That seems very real to me. A lot of people who watch the movie are like, I don't get it. I mean, that's exactly what worked last time. But it's not. There's no way Patrick can say it with the vulnerability because he's invulnerable. Patrick is doing that cheat that's kind of tempting for all of us, which is I want to be able to fall in love without being vulnerable. Well, forget it. So, and we can see. That's why I don't entirely accept the Groundhog Day issue with Bill Murray, but it's a really interesting romance to look at in relation to where we are. But I can only do so many movies with you. But there is some difference. Bill Murray is not strictly speaking of Patrick He's more present, and he slowly makes himself more vulnerable in the course. And Patrick never does. And Patrick kind of gets what he wants. He has sex with her, and I guess if that's all he wanted, and in some ways it seems so, like he wants an available, attractive sexual partner without having to really worry about the relationship. It kind of reminds me of why Edward hires Vivian. And first is he doesn't want to have a relationship with her. He wants to have her go to nice dinners with him, have sex at night in the bed, but she has no right to bring up relationship issues with him because he's already paid her for the privilege of not having to deal with any emotional entanglements, which is what he initially says when they're having that fight about him having told Stucky she's a prostitute. He said, I refuse to argue with you for the next 3 days. And that kind of, what he's kind of saying is he's returning to this idea of like, wait a minute, you're a prostitute. I hired you. We're not in a relationship. What difference does it make what I tell Stucky? I only said the obvious. And then she's like, fine, then I'm out of here. And doesn't take the money, I think, because she's really hanging on. He violated the boundary between the robotic way she performs her job and the way she's trying to hang on to some self-worth, because she is a worthwhile person, but she's been told by everybody, beginning with her mother, that she's not. She doesn't believe her mother ultimately, but there's always, the mother's one of those people she has a memory of her mother. A memory of her mother saying, you're a bum magnet. And when Edward says to her, I think you're an amazing person with all kinds of ability, she says, yeah, isn't it weird how you remember all the crappy things people tell you are better than and more than? So that's memory again. And memory is so tricky because we really want to have memories of how loved people made us feel. How people who love us made us feel. And so it's really confusing if somebody who's in a position where it would appear that they're loving you, and even they want to, and even they think so, but they're not really, because their own stuff is in the way. What you pass back, you pass on. Their own damage, it may be on display. Maybe they can, and they, in a sense, can't love you, but they can certainly insist that they are. And then as a loved one, particularly again as a child, you're left with that confusion of, well, this must be love. This is my mother, and she just said, I'm your mother, I love you, because mothers love children. So how can this not be love? And naturally, that's what you're going to look for. So if you're in a difficult, again, abusive, vampiric relationship, and you go to a party and you meet someone nice, quote unquote, you're not gonna recognize it. Like this can't be love, because they don't seem to be like trying to get something from me. And you might go home from the party with the one who's just looking for what they want, and they'll be happy to give you kind of what you want as long as they get what they want. But the first time they don't, you're either ghosted or the beginnings of the manipulations, the head games, we used to call them, the mind games. We still have that phrase. Now, the great poet laureate, and we talked about love songs, and that was your first prompt. And love song that seemed to work, love song that seemed to not work. It's much more rare, and you really have to move into the realm of really gifted songwriters to get something like romance songs that correspond to Eternal Sunshine, romance songs where the antagonism is built into the love. The two I can think of offhand, certainly the two men, are Leonard Cohen and Bob Dylan, and on the part of I think Joni Mitchell, and I'm dating myself. I'm not saying there aren't people that are contemporaries of yours that can work in the antagonism as an inevitable part. And so the song doesn't try and separate. You don't get you're all of me, all of me. That's a beautiful song. I love that song. All of me loves all of you. But that hyper-complementarity isn't actually true. And when Tom Cruise famously says in whatever that movie is, that Show Me the Money movie, you complete me. That's a bad idea, because once you set up the relationship as the other person completing you, you've set up a situation where the inevitable antagonism that is at the basis of your attraction has now been forbidden as evidence that you're breaking up. But it's there. It's part of the relationship. So you really don't want to feel or convince yourself or say to someone else, you complete me, because nobody can complete you. You can't even complete you. And they would have to lose themselves trying to complete you, and it still wouldn't work. The point of love is not to complete you. That's not only is that an abuse of love, a misuse of love. It's like trying to use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail. It's the wrong tool. We ask love to do the impossible, and then we wreck what it really can do, which is more difficult, but incredibly more enriching and important. It can force us to change at those fundamental levels that we never imagined going back to revisit. So Leonard Cohen is one of the great poet laureates of songs where the pain is appreciated, because it's seen that the love that is cherished is impossible. It would have been impossible for it to occur had the antagonism not always been there. And it reminds me a little of you guys may know this, that when oysters form a pearl, and not all oysters do, but it's because the sand has gotten into the shell and it irritates the oyster. So the oyster secretes a kind of mucus to try and create a buffer between the irritating sand and the tender part of the oyster. So that gorgeous pearl is actually the oyster's coping mechanism for physical pain. And then, if you're giving your partner pearls for Valentine's Day, maybe you don't tell them that story. But here are these gorgeous little drops of oyster pain. But maybe that's romance. I mean, what if love is and we love to talk about the pearl. I wonder if romance and love isn't the pearl, and then we want to forget that partly the pearl formed out of an attempt to alleviate pain, and then we don't want to remember that was a part of what made the pearl. And if you went so when you go to Lacuna, to erase the pain that formed the pearl, you obviously lose the pearl. And I think that's initially what Joel is saying halfway through the procedure, when he says, just let me keep this memory, just let me keep this one. You can have all the others. No, you can't have the pearl if you deny the pain that went into the production of this unique, beautiful pearl. Okay, so I'm going to, again, get around copyright here. I'm going to sort of sing along two Leonard Cohen songs, kind of briefly, and they won't have the instrumental and or the guitar or anything else. What I want you to hear as I go through the song is how the passion, the uplifting, all the things in Hollywood romance. See, Hollywood romance tries to forget the pain behind the pearl and says you've transcended it now. And you'll hear in this song, the two songs I'm going to try and do here, that in both cases, I know the first one, which is called Dance Me to the End of Love. The love song begins with their having failed somehow, broken up, and yet it's a celebration. So it's not the typical bitter ending of romances, that you can sometimes get. I wish I'd never met you, for instance. Which is really what the Lacuna is. And if you can say to someone that you think you were in love with, I wish I'd never met you, I seriously doubt you loved them, because I've been through enough relationships anyway where without without ignoring the level of pain of breakups, I've never met anyone that I felt I loved that I wish I hadn't met because we're no longer together, because I can't separate out whatever happened for me through the period of the love, and so I'm not willing to perform a lacuna operation on myself and say I wish you were dead. I'd be better off without you. I wish I'd never met you. Uh, I mean, that can be a true statement, but I think what you're really saying is, I wish I hadn't fooled myself into thinking I loved you and done all those things, because I didn't love you and I'm not feeling better than before we met. So, but let me try this. This is called Dance Me to the End of Love. Dance me to your beauty with a burning violin. Dance me through the panic till I'm gathered safely in. Lift me like an olive branch and be my homeward dove. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Oh, let me see your beauty when the witnesses are gone. Let me feel you moving like they do in Babylon. Show me slowly what I only know the limits of. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the wedding now. Dance me on and on. Dance me very tenderly and dance me very long. We're both of us beneath our love. We're both of us above. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the children who are asking to be born. Dance me through the curtains that our kisses have outworn. Raise a tent of shelter now, though every thread is torn. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to your beauty with a burning violin. Dance me through the panic until I'm gathered safely in. Touch me with your naked hand or touch me with your glove. Dance me to the end of love. Dance me to the end of love. I was thinking about doing a lecture where I just sang Leonard Cohen songs for 2 hours, but maybe you need more context than that. I'll put these lyrics up, or you can look them up, and then you can listen to Cohen sing it. There's live version that's gorgeous. There's the recorded version. But the song, one of the lines that really stands out, if we're going to understand Eternal Sunshine, is let's see, where is this? Nancy, da 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 da. Okay, let me feel you moving like they do in Babylon. Now that's fairly sexual, obviously. Like, let's dance, slow dance, in a way that's erotic. But then it's more than erotic, because of the next line: show me slowly what I only know the limits of. That's what Clementine does for Joel. She all he knows about love is how limited he is, and Clementine, in a way that's kind of emotionally reckless, is the only thing that's going to ever get Joel out of his chronic, mild, not even always so mild depression. I mean, he's just, and the way the movie is filmed, the lighting in his apartment, it's the most depressing room I've ever seen in my life. Everything is a sort of steel blue or shades of gray, not in the way of the S&M movie or book. But everything is just so dreary, and Joel has to keep everything down. He has to manage his expectations, and his expectation is that his life will be pointless till he dies, and that's a hell of an expectation, and it's a lot to manage. And in some ways, Clementine will benefit from his tendency to constantly suck the joy out of things, because her exuberance it has a certain, it's a bit indiscriminate, and not because she's promiscuous in a sexual way, but she's constantly radiating out. Don't you people understand that love's the only thing that matters? And people hear that from her, but that attracts everybody, and it attracts people who just want things from you, like Patrick. So Clementine attracts everybody. Joel attracts nobody, and there's limits to both approaches. In a way, we want romance to be. It's like we want to get rid of gravity. People talk about dancing on air when they're in love, but gravity is what, if the Earth's in love with the moon, the only reason the moon can be in relationship with the Earth is that it's in orbit to the Earth. And they're probably, let's just say the Earth's a man and the moon's a woman, because that's what so many of the poems talk about, that the virginal moon, and for people yearn for the moon and they long for the moon. And the reality is that the love of the Earth for the moon depends on the gravity that both keeps them apart and allows them to stay in relationship. And in a way, being in love is like that. It's like the Earth and the moon. You think you want to get rid of gravity. You think you want to get to pull the moon down to the Earth, but the love itself is the balance. You don't want to get rid of gravity. The moon will drift off. That's what happens with Patrick. There's no gravity. There's no gravitas. You want some elements of the love to be impossible, because in a way we're all impossible. Having a self is impossible. Being in love is impossible. Approaching your partner is impossible. So in order to be in that special relationship, we have to allow the impossibility and not just see it as a limiting factor we want to eliminate. Because if you eliminate the relationship, you cannot take out the memories without changing everything. And as I'll show you later, there's a, well, I don't know if I can have a chance to show you, but when Clementine starts giving Joel advice on how to run away from the memory erasers, and remember how weird this is. That Clementine's in his own mind. So he's giving advice to himself, and he's giving himself advice, but he's giving himself advice that he would have never occurred to give to himself had he not known her and been in love with her. That's how someone can be in your mind, quote unquote, and give you advice, or seem to give you advice, which is good advice, but it can't be them who gave you the advice, because it's all in your own head. What it means is that having been in love with that person, you're able to contemplate just choices that never occurred to you, not choices you were afraid to make, but choices that you literally were unable to formulate. And Joel got a lot of shame in him, and it didn't occur to him until he met Clementine, who is willing to be shamed. I mean, she just puts herself out there, and Joel won't, because anytime you're shamed in the present, that shame is partly constituted by when you felt shame in the past, which is why it's, if you were shamed all the time, especially if you were shamed and when really it wasn't your fault, it can make you like Joel, where you're phobic about any situation that could be remotely humiliating, including a reasonable rejection, including a kind, oh, this was a fun coffee, but no, I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or whatever you say to not encourage a relationship to go forward. It may not be the best day of your life if you ask someone out and they say no, but if you were raised, if your sense of yourself is shame based, you can feel like it feels like you're dying. And in Joel's case, one gets the feeling that every time he feels shame in the present, he just bolts from the situation, because it's threatening to open up the doors of his shame in the past. So when Clementine says, "Take me somewhere I don't belong," there is nowhere in his mind that she doesn't belong. I mean, that's what loving someone is like. You love them because they potentially have a place everywhere. So that on a certain level, there is nowhere in Joel's mind that Clementine doesn't belong, because she, in a way, has changed everything. And so when the Lacuna guy can't find him, because first he takes her into situations where he first felt desire, and he's under the table, and he's kind of confused because he's desiring the way a 6-year-old would. But Clementine is a grown woman who remembers that they were, grown-up lovers. So some strange edible stuff. It's pretty funny, but also kind of profound. But way more compelling. And the other two, when he takes her to his scene of humiliation with the dead bird, which he's coerced through peer pressure into pounding with this hammer. That's, I mean, even in the context of the movie, there's no way to explain exactly what's that all about. I mean, we do, and many of us may well understand doing something we really wish we hadn't, and in the moment we didn't know how to get out of it, and so we're ashamed. But notice that Clementine, who's dressed like a little girl who wasn't there, but now she is. And that's the other thing about when you love someone, it's really weird. They get a guest pass into your memories of childhood where they were not there. And you do almost get a chance not to undo the hitting of the bird, but to say, you're still a good person. That was a weird situation. You got trapped in it. You're unhappy with what happened. That's not who you are. That doesn't mean you can't like yourself or other people. And so Clementine doesn't eliminate the bad memory. She humanizes it because she has that tendency. She's not really big on shame. She's not shame-based. If anything, she's lonely based. She seems to have been very lonely and really doesn't want to be alone anymore, and that makes her this kind of aggressive extrovert. But let me sing you another song. This one's called "One of Us Cannot Be Wrong." And if any of you are music fans, it's just Leonard Cohen had a huge crush on Nico, a singer that you might know, Niko. Of course, she's not from your time. She's from I think she's still recording. Not that long ago. And but he had a huge crush on her and met her, in the late '60s when Joni Mitchell and Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton and not just this Rolling Stones and the Beatles, but the individual songwriters were making their way. But Cohen always felt, that he wasn't a rock star. I mean, in a way, because he doesn't do this kind of stadium rock. He's certainly not Bruce Springsteen. Springsteen has some capacity to do both. When we saw his, I thought, great rendition of his song on the Capitol steps, he can do that, and he can also do these stadium rockers like "Born in the USA," which is never going to be Cohen's style. Dylan can sort of do. He can also do both. He can do like a Rolling Stone, and he can do "Lay Lady Lay," and he has huge range. Joni Mitchell comes out of the folk tradition. Neil Young. I mean, it's amazing to think that Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen, they used to all play guitar down in what's now Yorkville. And Yorkville used to be slightly shady part of town. I can't believe it. There was $1 billion condos that are there now, and the super upscale restaurants. It's the toniest place in all of Toronto, but it was it was full of dumpy bars. Queen Street West is also getting gentrified in a huge way, but that was the somewhat rowdy part of town in Toronto in the 80s, 70s and 80s. Good Lord, why did I get off on that? Okay, I don't know. Maybe that meant something. I'm certainly not going to edit these tapes. I think that I said something interesting, but you can be the judge. So here's the song. I have to get the tone right, otherwise it gets hard. And Cohen's voice is so deep. I lit a thin green candle to make you jealous of me, but the room just filled up with mosquitoes. They heard that my body was free. Then I took the dust of a long sleepless night, and I put it in your little shoe. And then I confess that I tortured the dress that you wore for the world to see through. I showed my heart to the doctor. He said I'd just have to quit. Then he wrote himself a prescription, and your name was mentioned in it. And then he locked himself in a library shelf with the details of our honeymoon. And I hear from the nurse that he's gotten much worse, and his practice is all in a ruin. I heard of a saint who had loved you, so I studied all night in his school. He taught that the duty of lovers is to tarnish the golden rule. And just when I was sure that his teachings were pure, he drowned himself in the pool. Now his body is gone, but back here on the lawn, his spirit continues to drool. An Eskimo showed me a movie he'd recently taken of you, and the poor man could hardly stop shivering. His lips and his fingers were blue. I suppose that he froze when the wind took your clothes, and I guess he just never got warm. But you stand there so nice in your blizzard of ice, so please let me come in to your storm. Okay. Just that last line. I mean, just the last line. It reminds me of the ending of Eternal Sunshine again. Like, you know, the doctor went insane. The Eskimo froze to death. And every time he's like, "I know, okay." You go because he says, "Wait," and she says, "Why?" And he says, "I don't know. I don't know. Just wait." And she says, you know, and then I don't believe any of those things I said about you, which is, you know, a confusing thing to say. He's just heard him say stuff that's absolutely, can only imagine how shocked it would be for someone to play you a tape of you saying just terrible things to someone you just had this wonderful date with. It's so bizarre. And what Clementine says is brilliant. And she says, "But you will think those things about me, and I'll get bored of you and feel trapped because that's what I do." And then there's this remarkable pause, and he says, "Okay." And she looks at him, and there's another, they hold that moment, and she says, "Okay." And this is unique in Hollywood romance because usually Hollywood romance ends with the presumption of an endless future of complementarity. This movie shows that they already ran this relationship aground before. And Clementine isn't saying, "Oh, but we won't do that again because now we've heard the tape." She's basically saying there's always going to be a part of our relationship that is drifting toward what happened on these tapes. But it's also going to be drifting toward what happened tonight. We had we did our first date, not even knowing it was a redo, and it was great. And you reach that point. I mean, this is where I want to be. One wonderful visual. If you look at the scene, the first time they lay down on the ice, there's a huge crack in the ice, and it's a gorgeous visual metaphor of what falling in love is like. If you're not willing to go out on a river with a crack in it, you're not in love. I mean, there's Patrick, because when Patrick takes her to the same place, there's no crack in the ice. It's gone. And that was a choice of the director, so the ice is from the perspective of Joel. Joel's ice is cracked. I mean, he's taking a chance. He's not the kind of guy who walks on ice. He doesn't take chances. He never of any kind. Clementine probably falls in the water a fair amount, and more than she probably likes. So she needs a guy who's timid, but she does need a guy who comes out on the ice with her, even if he's afraid and hesitant. And a crack in the ice doesn't mean that isn't necessarily indicating that the ice is going to give way. In the same way that when you break a bone and you take an X-ray of a bone that's healed, it's actually stronger at the break because the calcium and so on that fuse the bone back together overcompensated a bit. So there's a bump in the X-ray. You're less likely, if you were to break your leg again, it's not going to be at the same point. Not when you're fully healed. That's why you wear the cast and everything, of course. But once the bone has repaired itself, that is the least likely place that you'll break your leg again. And on a certain level, I think the Hollywood romances they've been doing that. They keep breaking the bone of the relationship. Like when he sees that Ellie's now in the back of the car because she thought that she deserted him, and it snaps the bone. But if you can get the bone set so that it reknits, you have a stronger relationship than you did before the break, before the break up. So it's not necessarily. One could argue that a long-lasting romantic relationship, you're gonna break bones, and to think. In a way, it's kind of a lie the way the Hollywood romances say that now you'll never break a bone again. Your relationship will never break a bone again. It will. It's just that you've shown that you can set it. You can set the bone and be stronger. And not every relationship can do that. That's why not everybody's a good partner for us. There's a lot of people where you get in a relationship, it works to a point, but when the relationship breaks, you can't set the bone. There's something. The other person won't apologize, or they do, but the apology leaves you feeling vulnerable. Apologies are supposed to reassure you that the person understands, so you don't have to worry about them doing this again. And so many apologies don't. And the apologies you hear in songs, like that Adele song, which is "Hello from the Other Side." There's kind of a stalker thing going on. I've called you 1,000 times, and it's a gorgeous song. Adele's voice is incredible, but that song kind of annoys me because it's such there's no apology there. There's no, like, why did we break up in the first place? Why wouldn't it happen again? Obviously, this person who won't answer 1,000 phone calls doesn't want to hear from Adele. Now, personally, I might pick up my phone, but then again, we don't have a history. So. With the end of this song, for instance, so when he thinks about the Eskimo, I suppose that he froze when the wind took your clothes, and I guess he just never got warm. So, he's like, I know what happened to that guy. Like, your love is so warm and blazing, if you will, hot, as we say constantly, that were you to get used to that heat and then have it turn off, and you'd made that your sole source of heat, and you're no longer heating yourself. If you're like a lizard on a rock in the relationship and the sun goes down and the rock gets cold, you freeze to death. You were overly dependent. You don't want to make your lover your sole heat source. It's fine to share the heat, but you want to be able to heat yourself even if the other person is not there to heat you, because nobody's there to heat the other person 24/7. So I guess he just never got warm. But then the singer's thinking, I that could happen to me, or maybe that even has happened to me. But I learned things about myself. So you stand there so nice in your blizzard of ice. Oh, please let me come into your storm. And it's interesting that he shifts it not to a temperature, but to the storm. There's something about the storm that is so invigorating, because other people's emotional states feel like storms when we stumble into them. We don't quite understand what just happened to the weather, and we can do that to other people, and often you apologize for it. So if you, as we like to say, if you bite someone's head off, and I think Ellie says that at one point, if you don't bite my head off, say something. I said, and he does. He bites her head off. Why do you bite your partner's head off? Because usually we wouldn't say that you're biting your partner's head off if they just said something really mean, and you have to let them know. It's when they come in and you're, say, washing dishes, and they say, hey, what's up, and you say something like, why do you always have to say that, and they're like, what? Hello? I say that all the time. Used to think it was cute. And then then the other person has to unpack it and say, oh God, I just hung up from my sister, the most annoying person in the world. I can't stand it. And then the other partner has a chance to not take it personal. Yeah, you just said something kind of rude and inconsiderate to me, but you didn't actually say it to me. So okay, you want to talk about your sister, but you do have to let your partner know that if you do kind of bite their head off out of context, we all do. Relationship bones break, but at some point you have to be able to circle back and say, wow, I'm sorry I snapped at you. There was this other thing going on. And because it does two things. One, it reassures the other person that they're not your whipping post. Because if you're totally unaware that you're treating somebody as something you'll just like to kick when you're frustrated about something else, and unless they're damaged and need to be in an abusive relationship, they're going to leave. And if you're not aware that you're doing it, you'll be like, what's wrong? I thought we were doing fine. It's like, I'm completely black and blue. So you have to circle back when making amend, as we say. Everybody does. And so in some ways, I think the art of love is the art of the apology. It's not the art of the passionate, I will never leave you, I will love you forever, because you're just making that up. What's really loving is having the willingness to be vulnerable, to make a real apology. And I don't mean one of these ridiculous apologies where they say, I'm sorry if what I said hurt you, which puts it back on you again. It's worse than the original insult. Like, now, not only are you not saying you're sorry, you're saying that you didn't say anything wrong, it's just I'm too sensitive. So now I have two things to deal with. So that's worse than no apology at all. I had to give a class on apologies. But, and you can't make an insincere apology because it comes off as insincere. It comes off as, I don't really mean this, but I'm just going to say I'm sorry because I want to get back to whatever we were doing. Okay, so I'm not gonna sing any more Leonard Cohen. I know you're really disappointed. So now I'm gonna say a few more things, and I'm gonna play the opening, and that's gonna be enough for tonight. So I just put together a handful of what seemed worthwhile notes here. I'm going to read some of them. So when you first look at the ending from the perspective of having seen lots of Hollywood romance, it looks like a strange, compromised ending. But it's actually the most romantic of all, I would argue, because they are agreeing to accept that the crack is the fundamental crack, that it's not going to be healed. The point of the relationship is not to heal the crack that is the basis of the relationship. Everybody's cracked. Leonard Cohen has another great song. I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to recite the lyric, which is ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. That's romance. That's love. It's because love cracks you open that light gets in. It hurts, but there's no other way for the light to get in. You sealed up a part of yourself that is longing for sunshine, eternal sunshine. And you want it. You want the sunshine, but you don't want to break open the whatever protective thing it is that would let the sunshine in. And perfectionism is a terrible curse on a relationship, either wanting to be or expecting the other to be perfect. So I cringe when people are like, you're perfect for me, you're perfect in every way. It's like, don't say that. I'm just going to literally jump out the window if you say that, because there's no way I'm perfect in every way, and this you're wrecking it. Actually, let's talk about we're perfect for each other because of the way we help each other with our imperfections. Okay, you can say that. Why don't they put that on a Valentine's Day card? God help us, Valentine's Day is coming. This movie opens on Valentine's Day. You see how brilliant my syllabi are. I give you a movie that starts on Valentine's Day, the week before Valentine's Day. Who else does that? I'm impressed with myself for the moment. So the couple in a normal Hollywood romance, they separate to meet again to strengthen the image that they belong together because of this dramatized separation. So in Pretty Woman, of course, that second separation where she doesn't take his offer to have an apartment, that's totally unresolved. I mean, look at the difference here. Why? How is she any safer from people like Stuckey at the end of that movie? When she says it, there's always going to be another Stuckey, and he's like, yeah, okay, impossible relationships. That's my gift. Then she says, I think you have a lot of gifts, and I love when he comes down with the flowers and the opera. I mean, I love that moment, but that moment is so dramatized because it has to cover over a fundamental reinscription in this movie, which is that they just stopped. They skipped talking about the problem, and they're now saying the fundamental crack in which this relationship began, an emotionally frozen investment banker with a buffered up professional hooker, is still there. I'm not saying they can't work it out. I'm saying it doesn't bode, weirdly enough, it doesn't bode well for the relationship that they're choosing to ignore it. In a funny way, you have to cherish the part of your relationship that never seems to quite fix itself as much as you cherish what that crack, that fundamental crack, allows. You can't, the light can't come in if there isn't a crack. So stop seeking that kind of perfection. Sylvia Plath has a great line. You'll hear this in A11 if you haven't had the A11 already. The woman is perfected, she says. Her dead body wears a smile of accomplishment. Now that was Plath's devastating assessment of the demands of 1950s America on the woman. They promised perfection, they demanded perfection, and the perfection was like you had to be dead. The perfect woman was a dead woman because any trace of living, if you look at 1950s ads, like needing deodorant or tampons for a woman, any trace that you were alive needed to be erased so that you were like a Barbie doll, this wipeable plastic thing, which was death dealing. And at another point, she has another line where she says, "Perfection is terrible; it cannot have children," which I love too. That children come from imperfection, not from perfection. Perfection is probably contraception. The perfect conception is one that doesn't happen, because any conception that happens is messy. I mean, there's pregnancy, there's morning sickness, there's labor pain, there's birth, there's a baby, there's diapers. Trust me, it gets messy. And you gotta be down with the mess too, if you want what comes with it. So one reason we're so aggressive about hyper-complementarity between a man and a woman is that we also mistake that hyper-complementarity with an orderly social system. Like the couple has to keep saving society by being perfect for each other. Because if they're perfect for each other, then that means society can also solve all its problems, which it can't, and it never will. And you can't get that through technology's head because it keeps saying it's on the verge of perfecting everything, which is impossible and not even helpful. And people can't figure out why I just don't use my phone. The phone is not perfection for me, and it interferes with my enjoyment of my own imperfection. And then they're like, but look, there's an app that can organize your imperfection. And I'm like, no, first of all, there isn't. And second of all, I'd rather jump off a bridge. I like my imperfection. Why don't you like yours? Yeah. Anyway, the so films typically end with a romantic union, but because the union occurs at the beginning of the film's time, the spectator, sorry, say this differently. When you know the film has already shown you that the romance ends, then you're watching their attraction to one another and thinking exactly what Clementine's thinking when she's about to leave. I've seen the end of this relationship. Why would I get on this train? No, it's doomed. But what does that exactly mean? That it's what do you have that's better? I mean, what relationship isn't doomed? We're all mortal. So one of the other of us or both are gonna die. So as Alexander Pope said, the same guy who wrote Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, better to have loved and lost than to have never have loved at all. And by the way, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is a line from a poem of his called Eloise and Abelard, which is about a romantic couple, and they're a forbidden couple. So they take Eloise away from Abelard and they put her in a convent where they want to teach her to the beauties of not being tormented by desire. And it's actually a nun at one point who says you must learn to value the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. It's a very negative remark because Eloise replies, my mind is not spotless. I am longing for Abelard. You're telling me that's a sin, and longing for him anyway. You're telling me that could get me damned. I'm longing for him anyway. I don't want to give up that spot. That spot in your mind. Who wants eternal sunshine? How about the sunshine of Tuesday? Because the sunshine that's promised is nothing, and it blocks out the sunshine that's here. So sin, desire, longing, they all have problems, and they're almost by definition imperfections. I mean, your desire is a fatal imperfection. You're never going to get what you want because what you want is simply the thing that makes you want. And as soon as you have it, it will lose its capacity to pose as the thing that will complete your desire, and you'll want something else. And that's not necessarily wrong unless you keep thinking that the next thing will do it. And commodity culture depends on that. Somehow, commodity culture persuades you that every time you buy something and it winds up not being the object of desire that it seemed to be when you didn't have it, it's because it's the wrong object. Instead of looking at the entire dynamic, which is that it's never going to be the thing that fills your lack. Nothing is going to fill your lack. That's okay. And so romance is where they say, yeah, you complete me, and I no longer have a lack. They're doomed in a much worse way than those who say we are going to learn to cherish each other's lack in a manner that provides a lot, but one thing it won't provide is something to fill our lack. And I keep showing you guys this zebra picture. If you don't have the whole point of this game is you keep flipping these tiles around until it looks like a zebra again. You can't do it without lack. There's got to be a tile missing. If I put a tile here, this little game is psychotic. It can't rearrange anymore. So this thing is longing to be a zebra. And of course, in the game, because of this lack, which I manipulate, which is because this is always going to be a space, no matter how I move these things around, and they're kind of stuck right now, screwing up my example. But see, there's both a lack here and there isn't, because the lack isn't here. Because once I move the tile, the lack is here. The lack is every single place where there's a tile, except for the place where there isn't a tile. So the lack is the ability to move your reality around and have flexibility with it. And you want your romance to have, it's okay to have a lack. So sometimes when people say to me, I don't know, I like him or her, but sometimes I feel like there's something missing. And I'm like, well, there is. And they're like, oh no. And I'm like, no, I mean, there always is. Just figure out how big a lack it is. I mean, if it's a lack of tenderness, that's a problem. But if there's tenderness and you still feel lack, that's called life. Okay. Let's look at the beginning now. Now with the understanding that, whew, I don't know how long I've been going on. I'm going to see if I can share the screen. So give me a second. Go like this. And tools, is it tools? Speaker volume. I knew how to do this before. Where did it? Oh yeah, wait a minute. Share content. Okay, share screen. Share blank whiteboard. Share application screen. Application window. And where is this one? Okay. Am I sharing that though? That's the question. That's not the application. Okay, this is application window share. What just happened there? I don't like it. Okay, so I want to share this tab. I don't think I am. Damn, this is annoying. Hang on. Okay. Damn, sorry guys. You're probably tired of staring at me. All right. Did this before, and I'll have to figure out how to do it again. But this lecture's running kind of long now. What I want you to do for your last prompt before the midterm is I want you to look at the scene where they both meet up to through the train, and I want you to try and find shots, and again look at it without the sound, that now you can see indicate that they're working out of a sense of lack and a sense of fundamental flaw that is actually is also the essence of why they fell in love with one another. And then I'll work on my screen sharing skills so that we can walk through that scene and maybe some others when we do the open classroom this coming Monday at 7:30. And meanwhile, email with any issues you've got as usual. So weird. Probably gonna fiddle with this after I let you go. Okay, bye. I don't want to keep recording nothing. I'll get this on YouTube as well. Okay, stay safe and stay healthy.